Hi, hi, I'm Joel Jacobs. I am this year's Tournament of Champions director. I am also the head debate coach at Berkeley High School. Um, just to give you a little bit of background, because maybe some of you know me, some of you don't. Um, I obviously live in Northern California and have been here a long time. And I grew up in California, but I have pretty substantial East Coast roots. My father went to the Bronx High School of Science. I attended Wesleyan University, where I competed on the APTA team. And for the year after college, I was the coach at the collegiate school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So I've spent a fair amount of time on the East Coast. I really enjoyed the parley that I did in college. And so even though I've been in California for most of my life, I feel like I kind of have a foot on each coast. And I'm very sympathetic to the challenges of trying to engage with West Coast style debate when you're from the East Coast and used to a very different style. Um, I've been TOC director for, I think this is my seventh or eighth year as TOC director. I took a year off last year because I was termed out. But the main reason that I ran for TOC director in 2018 was because I felt like the tournament was not very accessible to many schools because it was at the time it was essentially focused on Northern California style technical debate. It was a very technical tournament. We didn't get a lot of teams from anywhere else because they just couldn't connect. So I wanted to do what I could to make it a tournament that everybody had access to. And I hope that I have made a difference in that respect. And I'm delighted to see so many East Coast teams attending. I mean, obviously, a couple of years ago it was in New York, and that was great. But even in California, it's nice to see so many of you attending. So, and a couple times before I've done this presentation on technical debate because I know it can be like a foreign language to people, and I am not. My back. I mean, I did policy debate for 2 years in high school, but I don't really have a tremendous technical background. But just from being around it and trying to understand it, um, I feel like I understand it a lot better than I did when I started. And so I want to pass on what I've learned, but I want to be clear that I'm not an expert on technical debate. It's not something that I ever participated in. It's not something that I really coach, but um, I I think that some of the things that are in this presentation may be helpful to people who are struggling with it. And so, as I said, I've given this presentation a couple times before, and what I usually do is give the presentation and then open it up to questions. I'd like to do that, but maybe do one more thing. So, that's probably going to be about an hour or so of the presentation, probably 20 to 30 minutes, and then lots of time for questions. And then if people need to go, that's totally fine. But the other thing that I wanted to offer in case people want to stick around for it is just to play a recording of a critique and then maybe talk about it a little bit to help people, because I mean, a lot of the presentation is kind of abstract. Like you may see someone do this, but actually seeing it in action is often helpful for understanding. So if you want to stick around and watch a critique with me, an 8-minute speech, you're welcome to, and then we can talk about it. Or if you want to take off at any time, obviously the session is for you, so people can engage in whatever way is going to be useful for them. Okay, so with that, let's see. Let me get this. So I've got a slide presentation. We're gonna set it up and share my screen. And here we go. Okay. Ariel, is the slide up on your screen now? Okay, cool. All right. So I think what is most helpful to me in dealing with tech is thinking about the fact that all of it is potentially understandable, but the problem is that a lot of the time people don't really understand what's happening while it's happening, and it's going to be impossible to respond in any kind of effective way if you don't understand what's happening. So I'm going to try to demystify it because I think that will take you most of the way toward being able to make good arguments against whatever you encounter. So, with that, so general caveat is that you may not need this lecture at all, because I mean, I talked to one team a few years ago who were like, we had all these arguments prepped for if we hit a K at TOC, and then we didn't hit one, and we were almost disappointed. So you may not hit a K, I mean, or you may not hit any kind of tech. Judge prefs go a long way toward giving you the kinds of rounds that you want. The field is more diverse in terms of styles of debate than it used to be. So if you're lucky, you won't have to deal with any of the things that you really don't want to deal with at TOC, but I can't make any promises. And at this point, the judge pool is looking a little more technical than it has in some past years, just because of who's available to be hired in San Diego. So I don't know what's going to happen, but you may not need any of this. But the bottom line is, certainly be prepared, but you don't have to worry or freak out, because it's nothing you can't handle. If you can get to the point where you understand it, and you will be able to do that, and we'll talk about some of the tools. Okay, so most common type, what do we mean when we say technical debate? Or at least the things that I'm going to talk about today. I think these are the things that I would be most concerned about if I were in your position. Speed, the ULI argument structure, topicality, counterplans, and critiques. This is where we tend to see theory arguments the most. Okay, but sometimes people come up with some weird new theory argument for TOC or just whenever that doesn't fit into one of these boxes, but it's probably going to be similar in terms of the general structure and the kinds of strategies for dealing with it. Okay, so here's some general strategies. Before the tournament, pref the judge pool. Use your judge prefs. You'll be able to rank the judges from 1 to 4, and you'll have a limited number of judges that you strike, meaning you're guaranteed not to get them as judges. So figure out which judges you most want to be judged by, which ones you least want to be judged by, and rank them accordingly. That's tool number 1. Strategy number 2 is make sure that you can understand what you're hearing, and a big part of that is making sure that they're speaking slowly enough that you can understand it. If they're going too fast, slow them down. We'll talk about that specifically in a little while, but just know that you may need to be more aggressive in slowing your opponents down if they're saying something that sounds like a foreign language to you. POCs are a really critical tool, and I don't understand why they're not used more. Get clarity on any term or point you don't understand, even if it takes a lot of POCs. Don't be afraid to ask more than one POC about the same thing. You need to understand it, and they have to take your POC. So this is one of the best things about POCs at TOC, is that they can demystify any argument that anybody's making, because you can force your opponents to explain it. A lot of debaters make weird arguments and don't explain them, and that's kind of a deadly combination. So you can take out half of that equation by using POCs. And once you understand what the other team is actually saying, find the holes in their warrants or lack of warrants and exploit them. So once you understand it, you'll be able to find the holes. Okay, so let's talk about number 1, speed. Okay, so if you suspect the other team may go fast before the round, you can tell them you can't handle the spread and ask them not to, preferably in front of the judge. So just make it clear that you're just an old country lawyer from the East Coast, and you're not accustomed to speed, and you can't handle it. So that's before the round. During the round, if somebody's going too fast, say the word slow immediately during the speech, and say it loudly enough that everybody can hear it. And one mistake that people make is they're like, well, if I listen closely and I really concentrate, I can kind of understand what they're saying. That's not the standard. The standard, or the threshold for you to say slow, is they are going too fast for me to be able to flow accurately. If you're not able to get down the important stuff that they're saying, then they're going too fast and you need to slow them down. Because without a good flow, you're going to be in big trouble. So don't be embarrassed about it. this is a tool that helps you get what you need to be able to have a level playing field in the round. And if they don't slow down, say it again. If they don't slow down enough, say it again. If they slow down for a moment and then speed up again, say it again. You can keep saying slow until they go slowly enough for you to have a level playing field in terms of engaging with their arguments. So that's speed. If they do it, which most of them should, because most debaters are ethical and want you to be able to understand them, they will slow down. But sometimes debaters are not ethical, or sometimes they just don't have a good sense of how slow you need them to be, or they forget. They get so excited about their arguments that they just go too fast, even though you ask them to slow. You might need to present speed theory. And what speed theory is basically saying these 4 things that are on the screen. You want to say number 1, the speaker is going too fast for me to understand or follow or flow or whatever the situation was. Number 2, you made it clear that you couldn't follow. Number 3, they went fast knowing that you couldn't follow. So they made a deliberate strategic decision to exclude you from the round. And number 4, the judge should drop the other team because now a fair round is impossible and it's the other team's fault, and it'll incentivize them to behave in the future. That's speed theory. Because what teams do sometimes, what you don't want to do is stand up in a speech and say, I couldn't understand the other team. Sorry, I guess I should have said something. Because we know what the other team's going to say. They would have said, oh, if you had only said something during my speech, I would have slowed down, but I didn't know I was going too fast for you. I don't want to go too fast for you, but you didn't tell me, so there's nothing I could do about it. If that happens, you're speed theory, you can't really present speed theory, and you're kind of stuck with whatever you get. So they need to know during the speech that they're going too fast for you. It's not enough that you know. They need to know also, and the judge needs to know. So that's speed theory. And there's also judge adaptation. So there are a wide range of judge attitudes about speed, and you may get some clues from the judge survey and from the paradigm. And so some judges will always drop a team that spreads because they just can't understand it. Some judges are at the other end of the spectrum, and either they really like speed and they think, some judges, unfortunately, who would be very sympathetic at any other tournament say, well, it's TOC and everybody should know how to deal with this stuff because you're like the best debaters in the country. That has some merit, but it only goes so far. But you may get a judge who says, like, you just should be able to deal with speed, and your only tool for dealing with that judge basically is to strike them. If you don't think you can handle speed. Or some judges, this is almost as bad, if a judge's paradigm says, don't outspread your opponents because I'll dock your speaker points. Well, that's cold comfort to you, the team that lost the round because you couldn't understand the other team's arguments. But most judges are somewhere in the middle, and most judges want to be fair, and they'll say, okay, if you get spread out of the round and you run speed theory, I'll accept it. So be prepared to run speed theory. Or some judges will just say, look, you asked them to slow down and they didn't slow down, so I'm voting for you. So try to get a sense of how the judge is with speed from their paradigm, from the judge survey, and maybe asking them before the round if you think it's going to be an issue, if you're hitting a team that you think is likely to go really fast. Although by the time you're in the round, again, you have limited tools. So that's speed. Okay, so this is an actual RFD from TOC a few years ago. Judge said, if you want speed to be a major issue in the round, you need to explain why speed harms the debate space, hurts education because less direct clash, and why that's sufficient cause to drop the debaters. Because this wasn't included, I couldn't act on your legitimate issues with speed and the neg's refusal to slow down. Okay, so some judges are sympathetic to the equitable issues. They are sympathetic to your plight, but they're still tech judges who want a certain structure to arguments, and they want you to have impacts even to something like speed theory. So try to get a sense of who your judge is and what they want around this issue, and as best you can, try to give it to them. But you do want to be prepared to make arguments that the other team is hurting the debate space. Okay, whoops. So let's actually go back. Oops. That's going in the wrong direction. Okay. So one common theme with a lot of tech and theory stuff is, you're probably, even if your impulse is just to say judge speed is really bad because it's ruining debate, it's probably not going to work because the other team probably knows that this is a judge who, the other team wouldn't be spreading if, in front of a judge who absolutely hates speed and thinks it's terrible. So arguing that a particular practice is bad categorically is often not effective, but arguing that in this particular instance it is harmful is going to be much more effective. So like they can spread all they want against other tech teams, but they are excluding us specifically from the debate space, and that's the problem. And it's going to cause us to go home and cry and maybe quit the activity, and certainly this sort of practice is causing people to quit the activity. Not spreading, but spreading against opponents who can't handle it and who ask you to stop, and you do it anyway. That's what's harming the debate space. So be prepared to make that argument, because we want the debate space to be inclusive. And so arguments, so there are a lot of tech judges. I may say this again, but this is, I hope this is one of the most important things you take home today. There are a lot of judges who think that particular technical practices are just fine, and they think they're good and educational, but that they can be misused. And if you can explain how the particular use of it in this context is harmful, particularly in terms of excluding people. So if you can explain that this practice excludes people from the debate space, you in this case, but in general other people too, there are a lot of judges who will vote for that, even though they don't think that the practice is inherently bad. Okay, so that's speed theory. We can pause for a moment here and just see whether you have any questions about speed and speed theory, and what to do if debaters are talking too fast. Okay, and I'm sharing screen, so I can't really see anything. So if you want to ask, I mean, I can't see you. I can see myself and I can see my slides. So if you have a question, just unmute and ask the question. Okay, so it sounds like no questions, so I will move on to uniqueness, links, impacts. A lot of more technical debaters prefer this structure. Many debaters are familiar with claim, warrant, impact. Uniqueness, links, impact is a particular structure that is particularly suited to policy type rounds where there's a plan and advantages and disadvantages. So you may hear a team talk about the uniqueness, and this is probably the part that you actually is most useful to explain, because if somebody talks about links and impacts, I think you already know what those things are. But if they say uniqueness, uniqueness 1, uniqueness 2, you may be scratching your head saying, what does that mean? So uniqueness is an argument that the impacts will not happen in the status quo, or, I mean, it could be the other way around, that they will only happen in the status quo. Basically, uniqueness is uniqueness, and I think East Coast debate now uses the word unique and non-unique a little more often, so I may not be telling you anything you don't know, but uniqueness basically means an impact happens in one world, but not the other. Because obviously, if the impact happens in both worlds, it's not an argument for your side, it's not an argument for the other side, it's an argument for nobody's side, basically. But you may hear debaters say uniqueness 1, uniqueness 2, uniqueness 3, and those are often like, in the status quo, this bad thing is happening, and this bad thing is happening, and this bad thing is happening. Those are your 3 uniquenesses. The links. Link 1, our plan prevents uniqueness 1 from happening, or whatever. Basically, the things that are unique no longer happen with our plan. And then impacts. So it's not that complicated. You should be just fine, but it may throw you for, if I didn't mention it, it might have seemed a little weird the first time you heard it. And maybe you've heard it already. But anyway, that's uniqueness, links, impacts, structure. All right. So here's an example. Uniqueness 1, in the status quo, anti-poverty programs go underfunded and cannot effectively serve the poor. Uniqueness 2, politicians ignore the poor because the poor don't fund their campaigns. Links, by establishing a permanent revenue source for anti-poverty programs, we ensure that they will always be adequately funded and can deliver services. Impacts, these programs will reduce hunger and homelessness, improve the quality of life for the people they serve. A lot of tech judges really like impacts to be put in terms of life, quality of life, and dehumanization. I've never quite understood it, but some judges won't consider any impacts where you don't say one of those phrases. So if you suspect from a paradigm that the judge wants to hear those words and their impacts, you might want to throw those in there. Dehumanization, quality of life, whatever. Okay. Okay, so that's uniqueness, links, impacts. That is the ULI structure, not that complicated, but maybe unfamiliar to some people. Any questions about ULI? Okay.
Does the uniqueness have to be connected?
It has to be connected to, well, it's basically an argument that a condition is present in one world but not the other world. Gov world but not op world, or op world but not gov world. So it needs to be connected to the motion, obviously, and the advocacy of each side. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. Oh, you also may hear the terms, I don't remember whether I have it somewhere else in the slides, but internal link and external link. In my view, these extra words are totally unnecessary, but you may hear them. The external link is the link, it's the first link. It's the link from the plan to the link chain. And an internal link is every other link. I don't know why you need to name them, but some people do. Okay, so that's what an external link is, the link to the plan. Okay, topicality, which you could also call NorCal abuse calls. All right, so the idea of topicality is pretty intuitive, which is that the gov should be advocating what the motion calls for. And if they're not, they should lose the round. And on the East Coast, there are abuse calls. What gets complicated about topicality is that some judges want them in a shell, and they want to hear certain jargon that goes with it. So that's why we're going to talk about what your judge may be expecting you to say when you do a West Coast version of an abuse call. Okay, so on the East Coast, you would say, here's what Gov should be arguing, and here's what they do instead. And here's how you know I'm right. It's not in the spirit of the motion. The dictionary defines this key term as blah, blah, blah. And so they, their model is abusive, or their interpretation is abusive, so they can't win the round. Okay, so that sort of argument is familiar to all of you. And a topicality shell is basically the same thing, just with a lot more jargon piled on it. Okay, so a T shell has 4 parts. Your judge, if you have a tech judge, your judge, okay, so here's my little joke about tech judges. If the judge's paradigm says, you do you, run any argument any way you want, what the judge is saying, what that means is you need to run topicality in a shell, or the judge won't consider it. Because if a judge says do anything you want, they're saying I'm a tech judge and I think I don't intervene and I don't have expectations about you can do anything you want. But these are also, those same people typically believe that a theory argument has to be in a shell in order for the judge to vote on it. Go figure. Okay, so the 4 official parts, this is not a rule, but it is a rule for some judges, that a theory shell, including a topicality shell, has to have 4 parts. One is the interpretation, and they probably want to hear you say that. I mean, I think a lot of judges, including a lot of tech judges, will cut you a lot of slack, and if you run what they would call lay theory, meaning you kind of make the arguments, but you don't do it in the official way, they'll try to be open to that. I think a lot of judges will be. But there are some judges who really want to hear theory in a shell, and who won't vote on your theory argument if it isn't in a shell. So here we go. 1 is the interpretation, 2 is the violation, 3 is standards, 4 is voting issue. So 1, the interpretation. And I mean, you can see it on the screen, so I think that should help you understand what we mean here. The interpretation is just, what is the correct interpretation of the motion? What should this round be about? 2 is the violation, meaning how did the other team break the rule? 3 is standards or reasons to prefer, which is, why am I right? Like when I tell you that the spirit of the motion was to talk about corporate America, why should you believe me and not just believe the government when they do it a different way? And for a voting issue, okay, so yeah, so this is the judges who don't care how you make your argument really want you to have to say it's a voting issue and say the words drop the debater. Meaning, not, so, I mean, when I was in high school, we ran topicality and policy debate, and like everybody knew that it was just a rule debate, and if the team's not topical, they can't win the round. Obvious. But now, apparently, because judges don't want to intervene with their own understanding of that, you actually have to say drop the debater. You vote for us because the other team broke the rules and isn't following the interpretation in order to deter them from violating topicality the next time. So those are the 4 words you're supposed to say and make arguments about in a topicality shell. Okay, so let's talk about standards because that's where things can
Wait,
get
I have a question
Sure,
about the structure of shells. What
sure.
about the underview?
The underview. I mean, people run underviews sometimes, but that can be about anything. So it's not, as far as again, I'm not an expert, but in my understanding, there's no requirement that you have an underview in a topicality shell as long as you do these 4 things.
Okay.
But you might hear somebody run an underview, but just listen to what it is and try to respond to whatever they're saying there. Okay, so standards. There are 2 again, you can make any arguments you want to, but tech judges often want to hear 2 categories of standards, fairness and education. Fairness consists of predictability and ground, meaning, hey, we just had 20 minutes of prep time, and in order for debate to be fair, we all need to know what we're debating. So predictability is really important. This wasn't predictable. I saw the funniest tech round one time where this team runs the most obscure definition of something. Like nobody in a million years would have guessed it. I mean, you could just see them during prep time saying, hey, we found this really obscure definition and we can make a topicality argument and catch the other team by surprising them in the round. And so they run this, they present the op presents this definition that I never heard before for whatever the word was. And then they just read their generic stuff about how you should vote on, you should vote on topicality because predictability is really important. I was just thinking to myself, okay, you're saying that because that's what you say in every topicality argument, but I really wanted the other team to say, yeah, okay, but your definition wasn't predictable, but they never actually said that because sometimes people just don't connect the dots. Okay, so predictability and ground. So fairness consists in part of ground. Like, does this interpretation give both sides enough arguments that they can win the round if they do a good job? And so if you don't really have much ground under their interpretation because they basically define you out of the round, then that's abusive, and fairness is a reason to vote for your interpretation. So that's one, and education is the other standard. We want debate to be educational, and it can't be educational if there isn't a reasonable interpretation, or if there isn't an appropriate interpretation. We'll get to reasonability in a second. And obviously you can argue things like interpretive tools, like a dictionary, giving each word. These are some standards that are reasons to prefer your interpretation, giving each word in the topic meaning, the context, use in a specialized field, framers' intent, grammar, etc. Okay, so that's standards. So how do you respond to topicality? So you're Gov, and you think you've run a perfectly reasonable, non-abusive case, and the op team runs topicality against you. You can argue 2 things, and you can argue both of them. You can argue, first, we meet, meaning we meet their interpretation. Like, okay, they say that that high means intoxicated by drugs, not an altitude that's up in the air. But you know what? Our case still works. We meet their interpretation. our arguments still function under their interpretation. That's called we meet. Or you can give a counter interpretation. You can say, no, actually, high as used in the motion just means up in the air. So use our counter interpretation. Okay, so here's where a lot of people get lost if they haven't heard this stuff before. If the opposition team runs topicality, they will probably argue for something called competing interpretations, which is an idea that if you're steeped in East Coast debate, will probably be totally alien to you, because on the East Coast, Gov team is supposed to be reasonable. They're supposed to be fair in their interpretation. They're supposed to be not abusive. And intuitively, I think most East Coast debaters say, as long as the government team presents something that is not abusive, that is, kind of leaves room for debate, and it's in the spirit of the motion, that's fine. We're not going to make an abuse call. Why would we do that? Well, because tech debate likes to argue about everything, or at least be open to arguing about everything. And so tech debate has decided that one of the things you can argue about is not just whether the government's interpretation of the motion is reasonable and fair, but whether the op's interpretation is better than the gov's. And this sets up an obvious trap, because if Gov didn't know about op's interpretation during prep time, but op probably could have predicted gov's interpretation, and they came up with all kinds of arguments. And if op can win that argument that their interpretation is better, then in theory, they have just convinced the judge that the gov is somehow being abusive because they didn't come up with as good an interpretation as the op did. So this can be a big trap for gov teams that you need to be prepared for. And you will see this on some paradigms where judges say, I default to competing interpretations, or I default to reasonability, but probably if they're talking about it in their paradigm, they're defaulting to competing interpretations because they're happy to have a topicality debate. I vastly underestimated the length of this presentation. All right, because we're probably about halfway through, so this is going to probably be close to an hour for the presentation. So if you budgeted less time than that, I apologize, but there's a lot of information here, and I hope it's helpful. Anyway, so you may get if an op team runs topicality in a shell, I'll bet you a buck they're going to argue for competing interpretations because it makes it easier for them to win, and but they have to make arguments for competing interpretations, and they will say things like no bright line for what's reasonable and what's not. So how do we know it's reasonable? Well, I don't know, because we're used to listen. We're all used to listening to arguments, and we know what's a reasonable argument and what isn't. But anyway, that's what they'll argue. All right. Oh, and that's the end of topicality. But if they argue that against you, there are all kinds of things you can say. I mean, you can say, well, there's no bright line for which interpretation is better. You just make arguments about it. So, and you can argue that that topicality exists to prevent abuse, and that we're really supposed to be debating about the topic. And the only time we should be debating about theory is if there's abuse that makes it impossible to argue about the topic, and if we're reasonable, you can argue about the topic. So let's just get back to it. You can make that argument. The other thing it's not in the presentation that does seem to come up fairly regularly is the difference between proven abuse and potential abuse. So you'll probably hear these phrases. Proven abuse means the interpretation is really a problem for us in this round. We can't debate because we don't have ground, or this interpretation wasn't predictable. So that is, they might call it articulated abuse, proven abuse, but basically it has happened. We have been prejudiced by this interpretation, and that's why you should vote op on topicality. But they will probably argue for potential abuse too, meaning even if we can have a perfectly fair debate under the gov's interpretation, don't let them keep doing this, because then somebody else will get hurt later on. Potentially, it could be a problem in a round, even if it's not now. To me, that seems like a really weak argument, and I think the response there is, okay, well, if we do it again and it actually is a problem for somebody, they can argue topicality. You don't need to drop us now. But the op will make that argument that vote on potential abuse. But just, I mean, like everything else, listen to their explanation for why they think the judge needs to do that and clash with that. Okay, so that's topicality. Any other questions about topicality before we move on to counterplans? Okay, counterplans. So counterplans have become a little more common. Was that somebody with a question? Lexi, I think? Or just...
Oh, no, I just joined, sorry.
Okay, you just wanted to say hello. That's fine. Okay, so East Coast, you have an advocacy, even in This House would round. You don't need to have a formal plan generally. There are sometimes counterplans now, I think, in East Coast debate. They're kind of creeping in there, but it's much less formal. On the West Coast, plans are a little more formal, and you may get a judge who wants to see a more formal plan. I don't know that you need to learn how to do this necessarily as Gov, but it's probably good that you're aware of the structure. And if a judge says, I really need a formal plan, then maybe do it. But so plan will typically have a mandate, funding, and you can just say usual ways and means, which just means the government has money and will spend it. A timeline, you can just say as soon as possible. Agent of action, which is usually the actor specified in the motion. So those are the basic elements of a plan. There are many types of counterplans. So a requirement of you may get a pick, which is basically op says, let's do almost everything the gov is doing, but not quite all of it. So it's a little different. And those can be a little thorny because they basically feel like they try to take away all of your arguments, because if you say this thing is bad, they'll say, okay, yeah, it mostly is bad for all the reasons the gov says, but like there's one situation where it's not a problem, where gov arguments don't apply. And then you're kind of scrambling to come up with new arguments. That's called a pick. Some people have run anti-pick theory in MG, saying it kind of screws up debate. You can think about doing that, but mostly just try to think of some argument for why you need to do all of it and not just some part of your advocacy. Okay, counterplan must compete with the plan. It must be a reason not to adopt the plan. So people often just kind of fall back on mutually exclusive. You can't do both. It's not quite that, because sometimes you can do both, but doing both would be a bad idea. So you may hear teams say we compete on net benefits, meaning they're not mutually exclusive. Like for climate change, some people advocate a carbon tax, some people advocate cap and trade programs for fighting climate change. The government could theoretically enact both policies, but it'd be kind of dumb, because it's better just to have one strategy and focus on it. That would be if cap and trade is the plan and a carbon tax is the counter plan, the gov would say we're competing on net benefits, meaning you're better off just doing one than doing both, because the two policies are going to bump into each other. Okay, some people believe a counter plan can be conditional and can be kicked later in the round, meaning in your first op speech, you run a counter plan, the government makes really good arguments against it, and then MO it says, JK, we're just going to argue against the case. We don't have a counter plan anymore. So can a counter plan be conditional? Can you kick it? Maybe. Some judges are okay with it, some are not. That's the kind of thing judges might talk about in their paradigms. Then there's a perm. And so perm is a permutation that is presented in MG, which basically says, okay, let's decide, Judge, this is not a valid counterplan. Let's think about doing both, the plan and the counterplan. It's not, so some people think it's making the counterplan part of your plan. It's not, it's just a thought experiment. Let's think about it. So if you're Gov and you're arguing that the United States should enact universal basic income, and the op has a counterplan saying give everybody a cookie, then MG can just say, let's talk about a perm. We're going to perm the counterplan. that means, let's think about what would happen if you did both. If we did universal basic income and gave everybody a cookie, not a problem. The counter plan doesn't compete with the plan. It's not, giving everybody a cookie is not a reason not to do universal basic income. So it's not a valid counter plan and should be ignored in the round. The counter plan should be ignored in the round. And word to the wise, always try to, if you're MG, always try to perm the counter plan, because usually there's a reasonable argument that the counter plan is not competitive. Sometimes there's just no way you can do both, but usually you should try pretty hard to perm. Okay, so that's the perm. And so we are up to critiques, the biggest boogeyman of them all. Any questions about counter plans? Okay, so on to critiques. Every year, many students show up at TOC trembling in their boots about that they're going to hit a critique and not know what to do and just be overwhelmed by it. And it's good to be thinking about it, but you don't need to be afraid because you can handle it. If you understand what the other team is saying. So your most important job is to understand what the other team is saying. Okay, so what is a critique? It sounds really scary. It sounds kind of weird. You've kind of probably heard, maybe you've seen one, maybe you've just heard it's this really weird thing and we don't know what to do. So what is a critique? Well, if you ask somebody who likes critiques, they'll say it's an argument that attacks the assumptions or the systems of power that are a backdrop to the other side's advocacy or to the debate. People who don't like critiques say it's basically an attempt to hijack the debate and make the round about something other than the topic that the other team prepped. But the bottom line, and so I think this is a more neutral, although I'm obviously not a huge fan of critiques, a more neutral, and I'm sure people really into K would take issue with my definition of this, but this is how I understand it. A K advocates that the ballot should be used to reward the winner of the K debate rather than the side that presented stronger arguments on the assigned topic. So normally, if you're debating universal basic income, if the Gov makes better arguments for universal basic income, they win. If the op makes better arguments against universal basic income, they win. A K comes along and says, Judge, you should decide the round based on something else, basically based on whether you agree with our critique or not. And you can see how that can really throw a monkey wrench in the round. So let's talk about how to understand them. Okay, so key to beating a critique is understanding the elements, because there are formal elements of a critique that teams will include, and understanding what arguments your opponents are making for each of these elements. And I would say, to beat a dead horse here, 90% of the time when a lay team hits a critique and loses, it's because they don't understand some important part of the critique or they don't know how to talk about it. So I'm hoping to give you enough ammunition that you'll be equipped to do that. Obviously, you can go on YouTube and watch lots of videos about critiques. Lots of other people have their takes on critiques. There's a lot you can do to educate yourself if you want to, but I'm trying to give you the basics here so that you won't walk in totally unarmed. Okay, so don't be embarrassed or rattled. Take your time. And if your opponents are nice and or ethical, they want you to understand the critique. I would say most K teams are going to be ethical and they're going to want you to understand, but they may not realize that you don't understand because the stuff seems so obvious to them. If they refuse to answer questions or they obfuscate, you can point this out to the judge. So if they actually don't explain it to you when you ask them to, that's a big problem, and I think the judge will be sympathetic. If you don't understand the K, you're probably going to lose. Although I had a team once who hit a K, and they won the round. My team, the Berkeley High team, won the round because they misunderstood the K, and the judge said, wow, this K was supposed to educate people and make the world a better place, but it's actually going to make people do dangerous things. So I'm voting against it. So that was interesting. But usually, if you don't understand it, you're going to lose. Okay, but if you understand it, you'll have a fighting chance. So how do you understand it? Understand the basic elements of a critique. And I mean, tech loves to make things fancy and complicated and jargony, and this is no exception, so got to understand the jargon. So first part is framework or role of the ballot. Second is the thesis of the critique. Part 3 is links. Part 4 is thesis impacts. And 5 is alt solvency. So those are all pretty jargony. So let's talk about them one at a time. Framework, the role of the ballot. I would say, okay, so I'm going to give you a lot of information, but one thing that I really, really want you to take away from this is listen closely to the role of the ballot, make sure you understand it, and make sure you understand the justification the other team has given for it. Because their justification for the role of the ballot is probably going to be flimsy and is probably going to rely on sneaking through and not having you challenge it. So be prepared to challenge the role of the ballot. Which is, how should the judge use their ballot? How should we decide the winner here? It's basically a weighing mechanism. And it's generally heavy skewed toward the critique. Like basically, judge, vote for the team that does the thing that we just did in our K that the Gov didn't do in their first speech. That's like a typical role of the ballot in a critique. And it's typically thinly justified. Like they'll say something that if you really think about it, doesn't make sense, and there are a lot of arguments against, but you need to make sure you understand it. Usually relies on an argument that fiat is illusory. So if you hear them say fiat is illusory, what that means is, we could debate about universal basic income, but it doesn't really matter because it's not like if you vote for Gov, there's going to be universal basic income. So this idea of fiat, that we pretend that the plan happens, that the motion happens in order to debate it, it's BS. It's not real. So let's not waste our time debating about things that aren't actually going to happen. But the critique is about things that actually will happen. It's pre-fiat, meaning if we say our K is important because it's going to educate the people in the round, we don't have to pretend anything because we're just educating people in the round, and that's why you should vote for us. We're making the world a better place by educating the people in the round. Okay. You may hear the phrase comes first. Listen for that phrase and understand what it means. It means, judge, you have to evaluate and vote on this particular point before everything else in the round, and certainly before what the other team is saying. Okay? And again, this is something that is a very powerful impact. Like if the judge accepts that their thing comes first, you lose because they're probably going to win their thing. Although, we've got some tools here, but it makes the playing field very unlevel. So listen to the reason why it comes first. And in the K that we're going to watch, for those who want to stick around for it, that's going to be an important point. And we'll talk about what the justification is for the K coming first. Basically, they're saying, judge, ignore all the arguments other than the K in this round. And it's often an oversimplification of a complicated reality. Policy making is impossible without objectivity. Are they really arguing that nothing good happens or is possible in the status quo? I don't know. I mean, it's generally the comes first argument is generally a vast oversimplification of reality. So just be listening for that. All right, so that's part 1, which is the role of the ballot. Part 2 is links. The K must link into your advocacy. I'm saying that. Not everybody believes it and not everybody does it, but I think that's a generally accepted principle. There has to be some kind of link. And so they'll come up with something, and the problem for the team running the K is that if they get really specific about your advocacy, then they need a custom critique. And they don't want a custom critique. They want a critique that they spent a month writing and that they can run in every round. But if it's that generic, then the links are going to be really generic, and you can attack the links. And you can say, look, this doesn't really have anything to do with what we said, or their argument for how it's linked to our case is really bad. And here are the flaws in their links to our case. So, they say using the state as a policymaker is bad, could be run in many rounds, and is versatile, but it's generic, and their arguments for it are going to be very easy to attack once you understand them. Okay, so that's links. So let's talk about the impacts. So Here's where they get to the main point of the critique. It may be relatively vulnerable to attack. So there's some really like creative critiques where they say things like everybody but you is a space alien who needs to be exposed to such. And there you can say, okay, like your thesis, your impacts are wrong, and here's why. You also may hear a critique where you just can't really attack this part of it. Like if they say racism is bad, if they say sexism is bad, you're not going to stand up and argue that. I mean, some critiques, and this is one of the problems with critiques. Some critiques have a thesis where if you argued the opposite, e.g. racism is good, you would be guilty of an equity violation. So they're clearly not debatable on that level. Now you can argue, you can attack other parts of the critique, but just be aware that some critiques, like capitalism, if they say capitalism is bad, you can say capitalism is good and here's why. But many critiques rely on impacts that we would all agree with, that prejudice and oppression are harmful. So listen for this part of critique, but know that, and try to evaluate whether this is something that you can even attack. And if you can't, then that's another argument that this is really not a debatable topic. And fairness and education are going out the window, especially fairness, because racism is bad is not a debatable topic. Okay, so that's the thesis impacts. And here's my favorite part of critiques, which is the alt and alt solvency. So an alt is the alternative that the K team is advocating for. So so they're saying there's this really bad thing happening, like government policymaking is bad, or materialism is bad, or racism is bad. So they're going to offer an alternative that they stand for. And so often it's just kind of symbolic, like vote neg to reject bullying. Okay, like we don't like bullying, nobody likes bullying, but what does it mean that I'm voting for you to reject it? That's just kind of a generic thing to say, and even a lot of K judges are now saying in their paradigms, your alt has to be something more than just rejecting something. So they come up with something called alt solvency. Alt solvency. I really want you to attack the alt solvency, which is where they tell you why they connect the roll of the ballot and they say voting for us does something really good. It's often a stretch because people run Ks all the time and judges vote for Ks all the time. And has that really solved any of the problems the Ks were talking about? Probably not. So the thing that they're going to say on alt solvency is going to be structured like an argument. And if it goes by really fast, it may make sense until you think about it. And maybe, sometimes there might be a K with really good alt solvency, but I've heard a lot of Ks with really bad alt solvency. So really try to attack the alt solvency and dispute their claim that voting for them is going to have all the benefits that they claim. And even like a super pro-K judge is going to be very sympathetic to that kind of argument. So make sure you understand what they're saying about why their K makes the world a better place and be prepared to attack it. Okay, so yeah, how many times have people run cap Ks and how many times have judges voted for cap Ks? And guess what? Capitalism's still thriving. Okay, so discourse. Sometimes Ks talk about discourse and they say, okay, look, we can't solve poverty in this round, but we can talk about an important issue and educate ourselves. And that's their pre-fiat impact, is we have educated the people in the room about this topic. The thing that I don't really see people making this argument, but I think is kind of interesting, that basically their impacts rely on you. So they're saying the other team is going to be better off now, or they're going to be better people because of this K. And that's, you are the expert on you. And so if they're saying, if their impacts are dependent on you, it's very easy to stand up and explain that they're actually wrong about how the K is impacting you. It may make you really angry. It may make you storm off. It may make you unsympathetic to whatever argument they're making in the K because it was because it was packaged in a K. So that could be an interesting avenue to explore. All right, so you've heard some tools for responding to the K. Attack the links, attack the alt solvency are often good ones. Here are some others. You can perm a K, and I guarantee you that when they read the K, it will include a reason why perms don't work, but it may not be a very good reason, so attack that. You can do a relink and argue that the K applies to the other side's advocacy as well, and if you win a relink, you should win the round. You can run anti-K theory. It probably won't work, because if they're running a K, it's because the judge said in their paradigm and or their survey that they like Ks. But there are some arguments that you could make, but probably won't work. And that's it. You are now guaranteed to win the Tournament of Champions, and that was about an hour. So, any questions about any of that?
Quick question about case. If someone were to run a case, is that their whole case? Like they can't make any other arguments besides it?
You should never say never in debate. Typically, that's what they do. I would say, and I'm not really well steeped in Ks, but I've seen a fair number, and I would say maybe somewhere between 50 and 75% of the time, it's just about the K after that. But I've also seen a fair number of rounds where they do talk about the case too. They like to hedge their bets. But in theory, there's no reason why they can't do both. They just say the K comes first, but there are some other arguments in the round, and we'll talk about the other arguments too. But,
if I can jump in, on the neg, K teams tend to read like a K and a T or a K and a disad or all three. But if it's on the AF, they can only read the K. So it's usually not only the K.
Thank you. So, okay, somebody who knows more than I do has answered the question. Thank you. Which reminds me that Jacob Goldman, who was a debater at Berkeley High, graduated last year, I guess, who really didn't like technical debate and never initiated anything technical, but like watched a million videos on technical debate and became really successful at beating Ks and other technical arguments, once said to me that they understood Ks a lot better by just thinking of it as a counterpoint, wait, oh no, I'm going to get this wrong. It's a counterplan and a disadvantage. That basically, a disadvantage and counterplan. Okay, so like there's a problem with what the other side is doing, and here's something better. That's really all a K is, with all the fancy jargon added. Like, we're going to argue for something else, and there's something bad about what the other team is doing, or about the motion, or about the debate space is kind of the weakest link. Okay, so that's, I hope, a good answer to your question. Other questions about anything that I've talked about so far, or actually really anything like you're concerned about or want to be prepared for at TOC? No more questions. Okay, and we've got 12 people here. So, I mean, if nobody wants to watch a video, we don't have to, but do people want to watch a critique and talk about it?
I'd love to.
Okay. All right. So, one of the problems with historically, I mean, I think, so before a few years ago, if you hit a critique, it was probably super jargony and super fast. And so you wouldn't even be able to flow it, and you'd just be totally lost. There is a growing awareness among K teams that that's really not fair if the other team is not a tech team. And perhaps equally important, that the K team might lose if they just make the K totally inaccessible. So there's been a growing movement among some K teams at least, to run what they call a lay critique, meaning they don't talk fast, and they reduce the jargon. I mean, I've seen teams run quote unquote lay Ks where they thought they had no jargon and they still had plenty of jargon because they didn't even realize that something was jargon. But anyway, that's the idea. So the California State Championship is traditionally a pretty lay tournament. But a few years ago, a team from Washington won. They became the California State Champions, and they ran a K in the final round, and it was basically a lay critique. So, so this will be, I mean, you may not understand it, but it'll be more understandable than some critiques, and at least the speaker is speaking at a reasonable rate of speed. So we are going to watch the LOC. I encourage you to flow it, and then we will talk about what the critique was and how you could respond to it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And oh, wait, there's something in chat. Is it a question? No, I don't. Oh, let's see. Okay, sorry. So I'm going to share screen. See, do I need to turn on sound? Oh, yes, share sound, screen 1, and share. Okay, so let's see, we're going to play.
Economy. This can create a lot of positive impacts for everyone. So for all these reasons.
Okay, somebody say yes if you're getting the video and the sound.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the conclusion of the PMC. This was, I think, a topic about immigration or something like that, and it was just a standard PMC where they had several contentions about how this immigration policy needed to change. And then, so this speaker's finishing up, and then
I strongly urge a vote for the affirmation.
Hello, my name is Renee. I'm going to be the first speaker on the negation side of this round. I'm just going to be going one off on the negation, and then I'll go back to the affirmations case at the end. If you have any POIs, just interrupt me. And if you have any issues with anything that I say in my speech, stop me and I'll move on to another part of the argument.
Is an off-case argument.
My time of 8 minutes will begin now. Judges, we have come to this round to propose a critique called Anti-Blackness that I've written with my partner, Ria. And this is our last tournament, so we're just going to go with it. First, on the framework. History comes first. History shapes how we view the world socially and politically and how to problem solve in the present, but Black history is rooted in racial classifications that prohibit modern equality. Interrogating these historical justifications from which we create our policies is a prior question to good policymaking. The second point is on assimilation to whiteness. African people suffered not only a bodily genocide, but a cultural one which forced them to assimilate to white society. Even today, Black people are either disconnected from African culture or must reject it to increase our proximity to whiteness and escape ostracism, like changing our language to sound more white in the debate and in real life. Thirdly, the linear trajectory of history. Historians misrepresent Black history as constantly moving in a linear positive trend since slavery, which fails to account for the violence that Black people are still facing today, such as the steady rise in police murders and death penalty convictions. This means that the affirmative is trying to create real change, only turning old forms of oppression into new ones. The fact that we had to abolish the 14th Amendment, or we had to have the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, and then had to immediately follow it up with the 14th to provide citizenship, is proof that policymaking without analysis of our history is doomed to fail. Let's go to our fourth and final argument on the framework, is that this tournament is key. The otherization and denial of Black students has permeated throughout the entire parliamentary debate space from the beginning. When is the last time you've seen a Black student get it to the finals at a statewide tournament? You're not going to see that. Something needs to change, and it's because of this racialized fallacy. Let's go to our roll of the ballot, which my partner can put in the chat, is that we are going to be voting for the team that best rejects the racialization of history. Vote for the team that best rejects the racialization of history. Let's go on to our links. Our first link is on how liberal policymaking is going to be failing. Sure, I'll take it.
How do you reject the racialization of history? Like, what does it mean to reject
later on?
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go to our first link on liberal policymaking failing. The affirmative attempts to create the ideological representation for minorities in policymaking, but fails to provide substantial material change within these racist institutions. Rather than actively trying to fight their own system, the affirmative pressures Black people and other minorities into it. This places the blame on those people for falling outside of the norm, rather than interrogating the racial categories that prevent equality in the first place. We tell you that racism always prevails. If we give these residents of these countries citizenship, that only thing we're doing is indoctrinating them into our society, which rests on white supremacy, making them inferior in a new way. Our second and final link is on reliance. My opponents are offering citizenship, making these people indebted to the state because they have no other choice than to support the propaganda given by the United States, because they're being told that, oh, if I wasn't a citizen, then I'd be dead in my home country, throwing them into a vicious cycle of subordination. The state allows this reliance to subject them to worsening conditions. The United States government can focus on how they're improving their lives while ignoring these human rights violations. So let's go to our sole impact on structural violence. Exclusion from the social contract, or basically ignoring these people and making them inferior, is making them forced into vulnerable positions where the state is exploiting our labor, which I'll get onto in the affirmations case a little bit later. But the dehumanization of Black lives and any other minority that they're trying to co-opt into their world is going to be downplayed to the atrocities of slavery. This outweighs on magnitude and probability, because all this death will never end if history takes precedence over the future. What's it really like? What's it really like to be Black, you ask? It's feeling the eyes on your back as a teacher begins the lesson on slavery. Weren't my ancestors the ones who fought bravely for us to tell our children that I have a dream? But only in our deaths do we go mainstream, like a man being murdered on the streets for no reason. Being Black is being held back on the racetrack of America, as race tracks everything that you do, even when you fight back. But despite that, we gotta speak white for them to spotlight our own stories. You walk into a room and they don't see the present you. They only see a Black history you didn't consent to. Thus, the advocacy is to vote neg to replace racialized history with Black autobiographies, which my partner has put in the chat. Let's go to the alternative solvency. We abandon any historical depiction of Blackness that has been written by non-Black people, instead boosting autobiographical experiences that Black people have the power to narrate ourselves. The performance is key. I, as a Black debater, have just given you an autobiography. This seemingly random and counterproductive act is actually disrupting the traditional norm of policymaking, allowing me to tell my story without fear of being stopped or interrupted, because I have the power over what I want to do in my 8 minutes of speech time. The second point is on the ballot, and why it is key that you judges must affirm. By endorsing my performance, voting in favor of Black autobiographies, and allowing us to share this K where dozens of spectators will listen. Cross-apply our framework point 5, where we tell you that this round, this tournament is very key, because by listening to this K and seeing that this K has won, we are willing to risk it all for the inclusion of more Black debaters in this space. Then thirdly, we are prioritizing listening to Black voices, having real-world solvency, because Black experiences must precede discussion on how to create tangible change. And secondly, debate space solvency, because our alternative provides a method for non-Black debaters to alter their perception of how they write policies about Black people, urging them to become better citizens and voters in the real world. And then finally, if my opponents try to perm this K, perm is assimilation. Any attempt to perm or do their K and their case at the same time is an attempt by liberal policymakers to co-opt Blackness and assimilate into their white narratives, meaning there will never ever be material change when Black voices are once again deprioritized. Let's go to the affirmations case. On the top of case, they talk about how people can choose if they want to immigrate to the United States, but we tell you that this is not true. It's not a choice to immigrate if people know that they're going to be killed and their lives are going to be terrible in these old regimes. They're basically being coerced to come to the United States, where they think their lives are going to be 100% better, but they're only going to be coerced to face more discrimination. Let's go to their first contention and do a little bit of an overview here. Saving people from unstable regimes is important. We all agree on that. But any action that they're trying to take that to attempt to help minorities, specifically Black people, as they give examples of Libya, are only going to fail without analysis of racialized history and allowing these people to decide what they want done to them. They said that Libya was overthrown, but making these people citizens will not end their suffering. We're giving them a false narrative that will save their lives, or only subjecting them to more harm. Citizenship is not going to take away all these historical harms. It's only going to make these citizens constantly stuck in a vicious cycle of being indebted to the United States that will always be inferior because the United States has given them this gift of citizenship. Let's go to their links. They talk about how people can move to the United States and seek refuge, but obviously this is just showing that they're trying to take accountability for how the United States has ruined their country, but it's actually just going to be forcing them to come and move to the United States. And finally, they said that citizenship rights are in the United States, but this has no link. This means that they have no rights outside of the United States, so they have to go to the United States or they die. Once again, proving that they are coerced. It's not a choice. Overall, let's go to their second contention where they talk about how the economy is doing bad. We're going to be turning our argument on how there's more sources of innovation because when
Okay, so that's, I mean, there were a few more case responses, but you heard the critique. So that's a critique. Any thoughts on that? Well, first of all, do people feel like you understood it? Do you understand what the critique was arguing? Do you understand the different elements of that critique? So again, you just, I guess we don't have so many hands that we need to go that way. So just feel free to unmute and just kind of chime in if you did understand it or if you didn't understand it.
Do you ever have to like connect the K back to the motion given or no?
Theoretically, you're supposed to have some kind of link. But that K was not very well linked. It was just basically a totally generic K that could be run in any round. So one of the things you can argue is there's no link to us, to our advocacy. I mean, basically the link was any government policy making is bad for the reasons that are in the K. And that's it. So, I mean, so I guess that is the answer to your question is that is the link. The link is that the Gov team was arguing for a new government policy, and the op was saying government policy is corrupted by history, basically. But in theory, there should be. I mean, I think some people believe that there should be more of a link to. I mean, insofar as it's a competition between two teams, it really needs to be, the K needs to be linked to the advocacy of the other team in some way, I think. But this was not very tightly linked, clearly. Go ahead.
Is there any like way I can access the recording of the round?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the CHASA 2022 finals, and I think it's on YouTube. I have a local recording, but let me see whether I can find it while we're talking. Other questions, comments? Anybody want to take a crack at what at summarizing what they just heard? So if nobody's jumping in, does that mean that you're all feeling totally lost by what you just heard?
I thought it was pretty clear.
Okay. So are you want to take a crack at telling me what the critique was?
I think a lot of the thesis was just mainly about how I think it's about like a lot about Black history and how the state's actions maybe try to, I don't know, I wasn't entirely following it, but I know it was about anti-Blackness and about how the state reacts to Black history.
Okay. Actually, well, why don't we start at the top? So what's the role of the ballot? Anybody get the role of the ballot here? I hope you did, because I told you need to write down the role of the ballot when you hear a critique. So somebody tell me what they wrote down for role of the ballot. You folks are awfully shy for a bunch of debaters. Okay, well, I mean, what I wrote down was the role of the ballot is vote for the team that best rejects the racialization of history. So if that's the role of the ballot, and I'm not even sure that I flowed a reason for the role of the ballot. I'm not even sure the speaker gave a reason to use that role of the ballot. But anybody have any ideas for what you could argue against that role of the ballot, saying their weighing mechanism is abusive, basically?
I guess like I have more of a question about this.
Sure.
Did the other team like end up saying that the framing was abusive?
I don't think so, but I haven't watched the whole round in a very long time, so I don't really remember. I did put the link in chat, and so you can watch the whole thing if you like. But well, if you were the other team, would you make that argument?
I probably would. Like,
Okay.
wouldn't that be like the right thing to do?
So what would your argument be?
I guess my argument would be something along the lines of like, the framing, like their framing of the round is inherently abusive because it doesn't allow for us to argue anything if we've already said our case.
Well, you could make whatever arguments you want in the next speech. Why does it not let you argue anything?
Can't we say that it'd be an equity violation for us to go for any rebuttals we'd make for them?
So, I mean, I think you can argue that sometimes, and probably in this round, that anybody know what kind of argument that is? What jargon you would use to identify that argument? It's a ground argument. Basically, you're saying your side has no ground under this critique because, yeah, there are no good arguments on the other side, and you try to make them, it'd be an equity violation. So how are you supposed to argue against this critique? And they'll probably say, well, you can argue the link, or you can make a technical argument about the structure of the critique. And maybe you can, but I would say, but that means that they get all the substance and you get a few procedural arguments if you can make them, but that's not really a fair debate if the topic that is being debated is not one that has ground for both sides. So yes, I think that's an argument that I would make there, is just to say this critique gives us, and this role of the ballot gives us no ground, no meaningful ground in the round. And that is unfair, and it's bad for debate as an educational activity, because if debate becomes about topics where one side picks, if a debate becomes a situation where one side picks a topic and they pick a topic that leaves no ground for the other side, then people are not going to want to do debate anymore, and debate will cease to be an educational activity, and it'll basically kill the activity. You could make an argument like that, and that would be structured in a way that I think a tech judge might be sympathetic to, because those are the kinds of arguments that are found in technical theory arguments. Okay, so that's the role of the ballot. I mean, I think you can say that the role of the ballot is unwarranted, that the speaker does not give a justification for the role of the ballot, unless we count what preceded it. Now, so the speaker, so I told you to listen for the phrase "comes first." Did anybody catch that in the speech? Okay. Y'all should work on your flowing before TOC. Also, it'll be, oh, by the way, it's paper flowing. That can come as a rude awakening to East Coast debaters sometimes. But in-person TOC is paper flow, which you will be sad about, but you will also be happy about because it means that the tech teams can't just copy and paste their back files into their flow. They have to actually write stuff down by hand, so it's kind of an equalizer in that way. So if you didn't flow, what the phrase comes first in that critique, you probably want to watch some videos and practice your flowing, because that would be an important thing to write down. So what the speaker said was, history comes first. It's a prerequisite to good policymaking. Listen for that. You're probably going to hear that word a few times at the tournament too. Prerequisite, meaning you need X in order to have Y. It's a way overused word. When you hear a debater say something's a prerequisite for something else, write down in your flow, no, it's not. And then when it's your turn, make the argument that no, it's not actually a prerequisite, because 80% of the time when somebody says something's a prerequisite, it's not really a prerequisite. And here, that's also true. If they're saying understanding history is a prerequisite for being able to make policy, I think you can push back on that. And you can say, look, you're saying it's impossible, I mean, POI, it's impossible to have a policy that helps people without the kind of enlightened understanding of history that you're advocating? Really? There's no point in doing policy? So like anti-poverty programs, like programs that feed people who would otherwise starve to death, we shouldn't do those because the people who are making those policies don't have a good understanding of history? Really? That's what you're saying, critique team? You can make those kinds of arguments that when they say something comes first and you can't do Y until you do X, that's usually very easy to push back on and say, sure, I get that we need to understand race in America better. I get that we need to understand history better. That's important, and we're all for that. But where we part company is where you say that we can't pass any policy and we can't even talk about any policy until America becomes unracist? Is that what you're saying? Because that's not going to happen anytime soon, and in the meantime, we need policy to help people. So you can make those kinds of arguments. Okay, so roll of the ballot. Do we really have to talk about critiques before we can make policy? I don't think so. I think we can talk about policy first. I think really bad policy right now causes a lot of harm and it does a lot of good. And it's possible to understand that without understanding the thing that the critique is talking about. Okay, so that's the roll of the ballot. Links. We talked a little bit about links. Did anybody catch what the links were here? I hope y'all aren't this shy in a debate round. All right. Okay. Well, so links. Here's what. So they say the links. Okay. So first of all, I point out that normally when you make links, you are connecting your advocacy to an impact. So the links that I wanted to hear here, and maybe I'm just ignorant about critiques, but the links that I wanted to hear here were links between using the ballot, the way the speaker is saying the ballot should be used, and impacts. But the links that were read in the speech were links about the status quo, which I would call uniqueness. And but what do I know? So we heard things like citizens without the K, even if more people become citizens from other countries, they're indoctrinated into this corrupt system, and that's really bad. Okay, well, so that's a problem with the status quo. But how does your critique solve any of that? How does the fact that you presented your autobiography here, important as that may be and valid as that may be, how does that change the fact that people who come from other countries are indoctrinated into a system, assuming everything you say about the system is true? So I would say that those links are non-unique. Structural violence and dehumanization were things that were talked about. And I guess that's maybe where I'm jumping ahead to alt solvency, but I don't see how what we saw in the speech solves any of those problems in any meaningful way. And I think you can argue that the K has not proven that element. So that's the links. We saw performance, and sometimes there are performance Ks. So where the sort of poetry that we heard in that speech, sometimes rather than structuring an argument in a more traditional way, a speaker will do a performance. I think these days mostly you would see some kind of poetry or rap or other way of speaking. Could theoretically be a dance or other kind of performance that they then argue is useful. But then, I mean, the thing is, if the role of the ballot is then who has the best performance, like there's really no ground there. Like you K team prepared this performance. I mean, obviously racism is an issue, but insofar as, like, if there's a roll of the ballot that says, vote for the team that presents an authentic experience of an oppressed person, and you don't have a person who is oppressed in that way or has that identity on your team, then you can acknowledge that this experience is valid and important and needs to be heard, but you can also make an argument about the roll of the ballot that this is a roll of the ballot that just doesn't give your team any win. If that's the roll of the ballot, you can't win the round because you don't have that experience, and so you can't compete in this round. And debate is a competitive activity. Replace history with black narratives, there are a lot of uniqueness arguments. There are a lot of perm arguments you can make. I mean, if they say it's important to have an autobiography presented, you can say, well, you presented it, and you don't need the ballot to have presented it. It's going to be, it has been presented either way, regardless of how the judge votes. So that's, those are the kinds of arguments you can make, but when you're debating against somebody's identity, you're in kind of a tough spot. So you want to try to look at the formal elements of the critique and see whether there are ways that you can engage with them. Okay, I said during the slides, I said that everybody who runs a K tries to run a perm spike, explain why it can't be permed. Did you hear one in this round? Was there a perm spike in the critique? Some reason why it can't be permed? There was. The speaker said the perm is assimilation, and liberal policymakers co-opt blackness. All right, well, policymakers co-opting blackness is bad, and assimilation is bad, but I don't know that the warranting was really done there. Why is it perm assimilation? Why does it, if we talk about policy in this round, if the judges vote on policy, on immigration policy, why is that assimilation? Why does that ruin everything? It's really not clear from the speech, and you can push back on that, which means you can perm it. You can say, okay, great. I'm really happy that you talked about your experience. I'm happy that we're talking about race. We can talk about race and we can talk about the case. In fact, you did it in your speech. You argued our case and you ran the K. So let's do both. And if you can do both, then the K isn't valid because it's permeable. It's not competitive. It's not a reason. You can judge at the end of the round. You can use your ballot to vote for Black voices and for the immigration policy that we're advocating for. And if you do that, then you should vote for us because we have met our burden. That's what it means to perm a K. Does that make sense? I mean, I was hoping for more of an interactive discussion here. I've been doing a lot of talking. So
wait, so is a perm K, like, you fulfilled your burden? So
a perm is an argument, usually that a counterplan, but in this case a K, is not competitive with your advocacy. It is not a reason to vote against you. So if you're the gov and you had this brilliant case that you wrote during prep time and you presented it in a scintillating manner in the PMC, and and you really believe in your case, and the op runs a K, the MG can perm the K by saying, no matter how compelling you find the K, it is not a reason to vote against our case, because you could do the K, you could empower Black voices and Black experiences, and you can reform immigration policy. You can do both, and in fact, I mean, I think I would argue there, okay, Op says you can't perm them because it ruins everything to have policymaking, but guess what, Op? There's policymaking going on right now. There's debate going on right now. All these things are happening simultaneously. So if you're right that it's impossible to do both, then your K doesn't work, because you're stuck with policy. You're stuck with the existence of a government. You're stuck with policymaking. So if you need, I mean, a lot of Ks kind of need to, they say that they need to be the only thing that's happening. But if that's true, then that's kind of it's not structurally sound, because they can't be the only thing that's happening in the world right now. And I'm sure they have some response to that, but that's how I understand it, and that's the best understanding and response that I can come up with. And that's what a perm means. A perm. So just like with a counter plan, you say, Judge, we can do both. We can do our plan and we can do their counter plan. So therefore, the counter plan is not valid and should not be considered, because it's not a reason to reject the plan. Counter plan has to be a reason to reject the plan. If I say we should go to the movies tonight and you say we should stay home and do homework, if you convince the judge that we should stay home and do homework, we're not going to the movies. So there's competition between those two plans. And in the same way, a K has to establish competition, and I just don't find the arguments for why they're competitive. They always try to make the arguments, but I don't find them very persuasive. And again, you don't need to have the best arguments right here on perming the K before you've even heard somebody's K, but I just want you to understand the different pieces of it and how they function together. And if you do that, then you'll be able to understand what the other side is saying, and you'll be able to come up with good arguments against it. And so this is what you're trying, know that a tech judge will if you say the word perm, the judge will know what you're talking about and will listen to your argument. If you make a good argument, the judge will buy it and will vote for you, and won't vote on the K, won't vote for the other team because of the K. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Other questions, comments, arguments you're wondering about? Anything?
For the K argument, I think you said that we could have refuted it by attacking their link and saying like, oh, so do you think we can't have any policies because we don't understand the history? Can't they say that it's just outside the scope of this debate, so it doesn't really count as a refutation on our power?
Well, that's the link debate. If you're saying it's outside the debate, you're saying they don't have a good enough link to this debate. And you can have an argument about that, and maybe you'll win. But that's basically, so a lot of this, I mean, it burns me up that you have to use the jargon and you have to say things a certain way for certain judges. I think people should be able to make arguments any way they want to, but some judges do expect to hear the words. And so my point here is, if you use the word link when you make that kind of argument, for some judges that will make a big difference, and it'll help them understand what you're talking about, and it'll make them feel like your argument is valid and belongs in the space. I mean, so the person who just asked that question, did that answer your question, or do you have follow-up?
No, that answered it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so just, make sure you understand what these terms mean and be prepared to use them. What is a link? What is a relink? What does it mean to perm the K? What is the role of the ballot? What are they saying is their alt solvency? And what arguments can you make about that for why no? I mean, because really, when it comes down to it, they are saying that the judge should vote for them because voting for them will do something important. And it's really hard to make that argument in a compelling way. That because we're just a bunch of people sitting around making arguments and playing a game is how many people look at it, or doing an educational activity. But basically, we're just talking. We're exchanging ideas. We're flexing our brains, and that's what this is about. And so that's why some Ks try to fit into that box and say, well, we're helping you flex your brain in an important way. But often, is the judge voting for them going to mean, sometimes teams will say, vote for us because then we'll advance and we'll run this K more and more people will hear it. But notice they can't say that in that round because they've already told us that's their last round of debate ever. So you have to ask yourself, what will it do for the judges to vote for the K in that round? And they'd probably say, well, then more teams will run Ks like this. Maybe, or maybe they'll run Ks about space aliens. Who knows? Or maybe it won't affect anything because they're like, Ks are run 1,000 times this year, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. And it's, it just as easily could have lost in this round. And then does that mean that nobody's going to run a K again? I don't think so. Does it mean nobody's going to run a K in a round like this again? I don't think so. So be very skeptical when they tell the judge that voting for the K is going to have some concrete impact, because they probably can't prove it. It's probably very speculative. Other questions, other comments? All right, well, I guess we're out of stuff to talk about, only an hour and 40 minutes into it. Thank you for sticking around this long. I hope this was helpful. And I'm sure it sounds like there was a recording of the round. And so the recording will probably be available. And I'll give Ariel the slides so you can look at the slides again, because you may not have the 5 parts of a K memorized at this point, but so maybe it'll be helpful to have some of the stuff in writing. So thanks for your time and good luck at the tournament, and I hope you have a great time in San Diego, California.